Hello everyone, and today we will build a 3.5-inch freestyle drone on analog and see how it flies in 2025. Also, I will show and tell you in detail how to build a drone yourself. In the meantime, watch ASMR video with unpacking all the components needed for assembly. Let's start with the assembly of the frame, and I will not just comment on everything because in general everything is very simple. Besides, there is a manual on FlyFish site, but I will tell about the features that may not be clear to a beginner, although I still consider myself a beginner. And I will give tips that help easier and faster to assemble the drone. For example, here it is easier to assemble the front and back bottom plates first and then insert the arms instead of doing as I did. We assemble everything except the top plate to understand how the components will be located and to measure the necessary length of wires to all components. Also at this stage, we can immediately see that we have everything fits or does not fit, such as this camera mount, so we will have to replace it with the one that came with the kit. We put dampers under the VTX so that there is no big load on it during hard impacts, especially for digital video systems such as O3 for example, where the chip is very fragile and cracks even from small impacts. I turned the flight controller power forward because there is simply no space for a capacitor between the VTX and the flight controller. The wires are cut so that they were not in tension, but the reserve in length should be minimal, as any loose wire in flight leads to unnecessary vibrations and noise on the flight controller, and as a consequence to more complex tuning and less clean flight of the drone. Now we start soldering. Do not spare flux. A large amount of flux allows the solder to adhere faster and form beautiful drops at the soldering point. Also, always clean the soldering spot from flux, even if it is flushless. Otherwise, it's hard for me to give advice, as I still haven't figured out how to do it right. For example, everywhere advise the soldering temperature of 270 to 330 degrees, but I do not get to solder at a temperature below 370, and for the ground pads I raise to 450 degrees. Yes, at high temperature there is a risk of burning some SMD components near the place of soldering, as some of them cannot withstand high temperatures, but also at a lower temperature you need to warm up the board longer and the temperature is dispersed throughout all components. So I prefer to solder at a higher temperature, but with shorter contact time, thus heating up only the soldering place. I am most comfortable soldering with a Shape BC soldering iron tip. Even small 65mm whoops I solder completely with it. Now it's time to check the functionality by applying power, and we do it of course with a smoke stopper so as not to burn everything. After making sure that everything works, we start the final assembly. I advise to heat the heat shrink with the jet lighter so it is easier to heat it at an angle and it does not leave traces of soot on the heat shrink, but it is better to do it with a hot air gun, of course. I always fix the wires with this acetate cloth tape, one of the best solutions in my opinion. All the files for printing 3D parts are in the description below the video. Finally, screw in the screws with thread locker. Now let's move on to configuration. First we flash the ESC. Don't forget that this is the first time we connect the battery. In this flight controller ESC on BlueJay, choose the latest version and frequency of 48 kHz is the optimal frequency. We set the same settings that were before flashing. Note that after flashing, they are reset. I also added something for fun. Go to Betaflight, immediately calibrate the accelerometer and check that all sides of the drone coincide with reality by tilting the drone right, left, forward, up, backward. If not, it is adjusted in the configuration tab. On the ports tab, we specify on which UARTs we soldered VTX, LRS, and GPS. I have LRS on the 6th port, enable serial RX on this port, On the third port VTX, and for this VTX we need to specify VTX IRC tramp in the peripherals column. On UART 5 we soldered GPS, and in the sensor input column we select GPS. Always save and reboot before moving to another tab. On the configuration tab, enable RX lost and RX set. Beacon tone select to your taste. I think the third one is a bit more loud than the others. Arm angel set 180 so that the drone can start in any position in case it stands on an uneven surface or fell down. Then we go to the presets tab and look for Superfly FPV 3 to 4 inch or AOS 3.5 by Chris Rosser. Both fly quite well. Of course it is better to do PID and filters tuning independently for each build, but I have not yet fully understood this question. As soon as I study deeply enough, I will shoot a separate video, as it is a really complex topic. On the motors tab, change the direction of rotation outward. Connect the battery, click reorder motors and simply mark which motor is rotating so that the program understands where the motor is, then check whether the motors are rotating correctly. On large motors it can be understood simply by putting your fingers to the dome of the motor during rotation. Of course, all this is done without propellers. On small tiny whoops motors, do not be afraid to do it with propellers and check the direction of rotation slightly by putting a thin sheet of paper where it will be deflected there and the motor rotates. If the direction of rotation differs from that specified in the Betaflight, just click on the number of the motor and it starts to rotate in the other direction. In the video transmitter tab, we see that the flight controller sees the video transmitter, so we have correctly specified the port, but we do not have VTX Table. To make it appear, we need to go to CLI, copy and paste VTX Table from Oscar Leang's site. Press Enter. Right save and press Enter again. After any changes in CLI, add the line save to save everything. And now we see that we have a table and VTX settings. Now you can customize the information displayed on the OSD tab. You can customize what you need. You can pause and see what information I output for myself. Let's quickly set the binding phrase in LRS by simply disconnecting the drone from the laptop, connecting the battery, and wait a minute. We see Express LRS in Wi-Fi networks. Password is also Express LRS. Selecting it will appear a context window where we enter the binding phrase, the same that is on our radio controller. If you have not set the binding phrase, then connect LRS to the controller by connecting and disconnecting the power 3 times. Check that everything is connected and works as it should.
Welcome to HTX. Throttle warning.
On the Modes tab, bind the commands to the desired switches on the controller. The commands I need are arm, angle, GPS rescue, beeper, flip after crash, and OSD disable. On the PID tuning tab, set the rates on which you fly. If you don't know anything about rates, fly on stock, Betaflight, or actual rates. I have them practically no different from stock, only on the yaw axis added slightly higher rates and small expo on all axes. Pause and copy if you want to try such rates. And the last thing we will configure is GPS. On the failsafe tab, set GPS rescue. Set the throttle manually. We need to know the hover throttle. On this build, it's about 30 to 33%. Let's set it a little bit higher, about 35. We set this value with a 1 in front and a 0 after, so 1350 in this case. The exact same value should be set on the throttle hover. Be sure to set the value of the switch where we have the angle mode set. This can be understood on the modes tab. If you don't set this value, then in case of connection failure, when your drone flies upside down, doing a flip for example, it will just fly to the ground. It will just fly to the ground in the first few seconds, instead of reversing and getting into angle mode immediately. On the GPS tab, choose the same as mine. Use Galileo, will add a little more satellites and set home point once. We'll make it so that the drone will assign the return point only at the first arm, not reassigning it every time. It is useful if you suddenly, where you fell somewhere that turned upside down and took off further. Then when you lose communication, drone will fly to you and not to the point of fall. This is the end of the settings. It is left to screw the screws on, check the weight of the drone, and finally test it. Dry weight 199 grams. Yeah, I wasn't chasing lightness in this build. 256 grams with a 550 milliamp battery. I think it's easy to make it under 250 grams. With a 750 milliamp battery, the weight is 286 grams. And 294 grams with the 850 milliamps.
Welcome to HTX.
Thanks for watching everyone. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Write your questions and wishes in the comments. See you soon and bye bye.